production time has expired. The motion for this has been that the international community should fund and support the establishment of a nation that for refugees in currently underpopulated but habitable areas. Now we call upon the Prime Minister. Please open your case within 7 minutes. Here.
The problem of refugees is clear. We do not consent and repeat how serious the problem is about refugees. The problem about this debate is how to solve the problem, how to deal with the problem, and we think establishment of a new nation is fundamentally necessary in contrast to any other alternative that is available under status quo or opposition paradigm, and that's why we propose this policy. So model. We will create a nation as non-motion state, underpopulated but habitable area. For example, in real context, Canada, Australia, etc. So we will have one nation but different region if possible. For example, if Canadian region, for example, is full of capacity and people who are going to live in Australia, for example, if the capacity is so overpopulated, for example, right? And also refugee citizens, I should say right now, have a right to vote to the nation, which is nearly equivalent to the system we have right now, i.e. Israel. So people who are experiencing a persecution or political persecution and victimization of their dignity as a common experience gather together and form a nation. Despite of the differences between gender, race, or family, for example, people collaborate with each other for democracy. I.e., here's a history lesson, Israel was funded by the West, we will fund as a global community on our side of their bench. We will choose countries who are welcoming to accept but have an underpopulated area and habitable area. We will guarantee police forces, infrastructure, schooling, for example, and any other alternative elements which is necessary for functioning states on our side of their bench. Furthermore, we will guarantee a transportation mechanism for people to move to the country because they deserve a citizenship and they deserve a protection on our side of the house, which is not the guarantee on the status quo. But furthermore, just for sake of this policy benefits a country which allows it to give up their territory, we will offer a massive financial benefit to those countries in return. Thank you very much. So we will also have a dispatch a monitor, for example, by international community for the sake of election is going to be fair, judiciary is going to be functioning, presidents is numerous in the project of nation building right now. If people want to have a dual citizenship, for example, that's great. We will offer for free for sure. Problem as 3 points in substandard. One is about the problem with regards to people who are not subscribed to new nation, for example, on our status quo. Secondly, it was a benefit exclusive to inside country, but lastly, benefit international and extended benefit outside the country. Yes, you.
Your model sounds very expensive. How long are you going to keep paying?
At the point at which we are going to solve, at the point that Syrian conflict is going to be solved right now, and also in terms of money, we will do as much as possible. And also we are having available we will have a available budget if necessary. I don't see if the budget is a problem. My really second dinosaur speaker would respond to that. Problem. People literally going to either die or marginalize if we do nothing about it. I don't think Sigariga opposition would not defend the status quo. Also, the best option available for opposition is supply Germany, for example, for a massive benefit, for the welcoming, etc. The problem we see, even in that scenario, is so much concentration of the population to an extent. The habitable condition is not that good, but more importantly, perhaps, it is not stable because government is essentially accountable to their own citizens, not necessarily refugee on their side of the house. But furthermore, even though being refugee is superficially welcome to the country, having a job opportunity, for example, in those areas. There's a difference in identity and cognition or welcoming attitude by German people, for example, right? There's a clear distinction between German people and being refugees, for example. There's a less opportunity and less availability for those people to become friends, become communicative as much, in contrast to the government bench model. Because on the outside of the house, when people concentrated to a new nation, for example, they see as comrades and see as friends. They see as comrades, and we think similarity of identity, no thank you, is necessarily a prerequisite for people to have a good relationship between each other. So that even ostensive acceptance by the state does not necessarily change the mindset of the people down the line on that side of the house, no thank you. And that's how our policy is fundamentally necessary, because we will accept, because in the comparative mechanism, we think our policy is far better. So what is the benefit exclusive inside the country? Several things. No thank you. So we can make a policy for refugees or citizens under status on our side of the house, can make a policy exclusively for their interests, for the sake of refugees' interests. Under status quo, in any alternative, refugees cannot govern themselves, in its benefit would be shut down. Not necessarily tangible or long-lasting, ladies and gentlemen, because in any other politics, like alternative, any other alternative necessarily have to face a dilution of the voices for the refugees for the sake of another identity to be preserved. So what's an exclusive benefit that we can more likely to achieve on our side of the house? Educational policy, as well as many hospitals to heal the mental trauma, for example, for those people, is more likely to achieve on our side of their base, right? But furthermore, the concentration of skill is more likely to happen. Human resources, money, recognizing many refugees is skilled, talented, as well, and so that also, as I noted in my first study material, job environment, also the degree of cooperation, political cooperation, etc., and cultural integration, etc., is more likely to facilitate on our side of the house. But furthermore, scale is important. So scale being this de facto scale necessarily leads to more economic prosperity, but furthermore, the sense of contribution by themselves as a result of this policy. We think that's beneficial in comparison to the opposition bench best case scenario. But lastly, we think this policy has an international benefit as a sovereign state. First and foremost, as a nation state, they have a right to have an independent right to receive aid through international community, and the aid is concentrated for their state. But secondly, sovereignty under status quo, Syria declares it is a civil war. It is not an international problem because it is go against the self-determination policy which the international community sets for the state, right? So we have a right to self-determination, and we have a privilege by having a sovereignty, and we think that's positive in contrast to status quo's opposition paradigm. But lastly, by the virtue that they have a sovereign state recognized by the nation state as a united international community, they will have an exclusive voice in UN conference, for example. What that means that, in international community, even if some deficit happens on our side of the house, the voices associated and called by this policy is going to rectify the international funding if some are wrong, for example. And also, we will have a more critical voice if the international community is something doing wrong for the sake of refugees. From these comprehensive reasons, we can save refugees in more humanitarian, efficient, and more just manner, we propose.
Thank you, Mark. Next now we call upon the leader of the expedition. Please open your case within 7 minutes. Here, here.
The reason why refugees are becoming refugees is not because they don't have a nation, Mr. Speaker. This is because, for example, civil conflicts inside the countries, or those kind of ethnic cleansing happening inside under the dictatorships, or those kind of things, right? In that kind of situation, we think their side of the house is negating the root cause of the creation of the refugees, and they're running away from those kind of nation to tackle to those kind of root cause. We believe internalizing those kind of problems of the refugee crisis is crucially important on our side of the house to tackle the root cause of the refugees. But because this is beneficial for the future prevention of creating more further refugee crisis, we believe our side is more tackling to the root cause of the creation of the refugee crisis. I'm going to talk about mainly two things. Firstly, about I'm going to set up how their side of the house is wasting those kind of monies for those kind of refugee crisis. But second, how this motion disincentivize international society to internalize the problem of the refugee crisis and cannot tackle the root cause of the refugee crisis. Before that, several refutations, right? So Fujita-san told us, beautifully, that the policy that caters to refugees are going to be made on their side of the house by creating the government which is solely for those kind of refugees, right? This is, Mr. Speaker, impossible. Why is that? It's because why the refugees become refugee is difficult from refugee to refugees. For example, there are refugees who became refugee because of the ethnic cleansing. For example, in Rohingya people or those kind of individuals who have been alienated from the country, from, for example, Syria because they had a conflict, right? We believe in those kind of occasions, what the demand of the refugee is different from the refugee to refugee, Mr. Speaker. For example, for those kind of environmental refugees, maybe those kind of environmental pollution ended in that kind of country. Maybe they want to go back, right? But for those kind of individuals who haven't prolonging conflict and the infrastructure of their original country is already corrupted, maybe they want to stay inside the nation, right? In those kind of situations, the freedom of the movement or those kind of policies regarding about the citizenship or those kind of how they are going to create a visa or air passport is going to be different from person to person, right? In those kind of occasions, how it is impossible for their side of the house to cater to every single refugee, and we believe in that, especially under their paradigm, refugees are from the various kind of the countries, and we believe that is impossible to begin with. But furthermore, they told us the sovereignty is going to create more empower those kind of refugees because they can voice out, for example, inside UN, right? But Mr. Speaker, we have to rethink that what their side is doing, right? They're going to fund massive amount of money toward those kind of refugee nations. They said that until the Syrian conflict ends, and I don't know when it's going to end. But we believe in that kind of occasion, they're making those kind of refugee nations economically dependent to those kind of international societies funding, right, Mr. Speaker? No thanks. In that kind of occasion, it is hard for those refugee nations to voice out, which might be the conflicting argument to those kind of international society, Mr. Speaker, because they will fear that if they go against those kind of international societies' majoritarian view, they might get less payment, less funding toward those kind of nations, and we believe that is crucial for those kind of nations in the first place, because they are fully dependent on their model that those kind of prolonging funding is so important in order to sustain their own government, right? No thanks. We believe that is not going to happen, that those beautiful world is not going to be created on their side of the house, right? Moving on to my setup. Mr. Speaker, the concession in today's debate is that those international society has the massive amount of money in order to tackle those refugee crisis, right? So funding to create a new nation in currently underpopulated but habitable place is that, which means that underpopulated but habitable means that there are less infrastructure, less labor market, less shelters, and that will cost billions and zillions of money in order to create those kind of things, right? So the concession here is that the international community has certain budget to use in order to tackle the refugee crisis. So we rather on our side of the house is going to use that kind of money in order to reform the camp or those kind of to just go to put more sanctions toward those nations who are creating the refugee in the first place. For example, to Syria, we're going to send more troops or those kind of things, right? But furthermore, we're going to fund the country, for example, Canada, which already accepts those kind of refugee in the first place. We're rather not going to create the alienated place, but we're rather going to internalize this kind of problem and tackle as our problem, right? Moving on to my substantive, how this motion disincentivize international society to tackle this kind of problem that root cause, right? So let's compare the status quo and after our model. Under the status quo, the countries which accept, for example, Canada, refugees have the incentive to internalize the problem of the the refugee crisis. Because the flow of the refugees to your own nation will influence all citizens inside the nation. For example, those citizens fear the refugee eating up your labor market. In that kind of scenario, citizens will have the incentive to find out the root cause of the refugees. Political will to support more sanctions to the countries which create refugee crisis, i.e. Syria, which counters the root cause, right? We're going to send more, there are going to be a more discourse about sending more troops to the Syria because we don't want to be influenced. We don't want our labor market to be eaten up, those kind of refugees, right? Yes, sir.
So in the realistic restriction, Syrian conflict will not going to end. Civil war in Sudan lasted for 25 years. How do we deal with the refugee who wants right now? And what may be alternative better than our policy?
Yeah, in that sense, we're going to reform the camp. We acknowledge the status quo, like the camp system is to some extent bad, but if we have those like massive amount of money, we're going to create more securities, we're going to send more media to those kind of areas so that there are going to be a check and balance system, right? So in that kind of vision, the analogy here is that Rohingya individuals are flowing into Bangladesh, and those Bangladesh citizens are oppressing Myanmar to take some kind of action to prevent those kind of flows into Bangladesh, right? In that kind of scenario, we believe there is a crucial political will in order to stop these kind of root cause in the first place. But after taking their model, what is going to happen is that international society will have less incentive to tackle those kind of root cause because they are purely not influenced by those kind of actions, right? But furthermore, it strengthens the right-wing party to alienate those kind of refugees. We acknowledge the status quo in France. Those kind of right-wing party are to some extent being strengthened, but this policy is going to strengthen more, structurally strengthen that this motion, or this policy is going to be the silver bullet to tackle those kind of refugee crisis in the first place. This is going to be the only way to solve the refugee crisis. We believe that is not like something to go as an international society. We're more than happy to stand in the side of opposition.
Thank you, Mark. So next now we call upon Deputy Prime Minister. Here.
It is undeniable that more must be done by the international community to help refugees who are existing in unacceptable, literally uninhabitable conditions. When the headlines in Europe on a week-to-week basis, 50, 100 migrants from Libya drown in the sea off Italy because they were so desperate, so underprovided for by the status quo, or UN camps reporting conditions of famine and disease. This is uninhabitable, and this is a violation of basic universal human rights. That help is insufficient. It's also a massively fragmented and inefficient system that needs to be reformed, consolidated, and we're providing the mechanism for doing that. So when they come to us with a challenge that, oh no, this is expensive, well, A, what's the point of the debate if you can't imagine a way in which this may be going to be possible? B, of course it's going to be more expensive than the status quo in the short term. There are two very persuasive reasons why we don't care, or we're happy to take the burden of that cost, put it especially on the burden or the shoulders of the richer states. Number one, the rights of refugees. Number two, the long-term benefits of this kind of system to the states that are funding this disproportionately outweigh that initial startup cost that exists. So before I get into those two issues, some rebuttals to these guys. So first, they assert that refugees are always created by civil war, which is empirically false, but then they say, well, you have to solve the root causes of refugees being created, which presumably in their only case, which is civil war, means Western military intervention. Case study, Iraq. That was bad for literally everyone. That is a situation that has cost the US taxpayer trillions of dollars. I'm not exaggerating, over 10 years. Cost thousands of American service personnel's lives, killed hundreds of thousands of Iraqi citizens as well. Attempts to solve the root cause that they claim exists purely have to rely on force, and those are not the way to actually guarantee peace, right? To protect these individuals' rights. Solve the root cause is meaningless if that's their own case. Next, they say, oh no, your new refugee state is going to be dependent on international society. It's going to have to listen to what the international community wants sometimes, and it can't defy them when there's an imposition or something. The Point is, there's more of a chance for refugees to have their voice heard when they're organised into one single bloc with, for example, UN member states. It's representation of the General Assembly.
Yeah.
Much easier for refugees who have very common interests to organise around those interests and pursue them, rather than under status quo, when they're dispersed into dotted around refugee camps, which are obviously not very well accessed in terms of media, other infrastructure, struggle to make their voice heard, struggle to have refugee concerns represented. Better representation for refugees on our side. Next, they say, well, our countermodel is we're going to fund Canada to take more refugees. It's like presumably an infinite extent, so maybe 10 million, maybe 20 million. That is problematic because there's a disproportionate burden being placed on a single community. So yes, we're happy to say there is some right to communal integrity even for rich states, right? There is some common interest in making sure that the makeup of your community is to some extent reflective of your own identity, and therefore a massive influx of refugees to an infinite extent is problematic. It's problematic too because, yes, you see in Germany 1 million refugees, mass backlash. That's a problem. Why then are we actually better? Because we're creating a discrete community in a depopulated area. So we're not actually having a direct impact on the lives of very many people. A small number of people are directly harmed. But critically, right, even if a small number of, say, Canadian farmers feel disempowered, disenfranchised, if they feel harmed, that's fine, because the harm of not doing this, not providing for these refugees' rights, not guaranteeing their future and their safety, is so much worse. They deserve, their rights are more important, and they're urgent as well. So we're happy to disenfranchise those people, it's fine. No, thank you. So, yes, we need to do more to help refugees. I've already told you. This system that we have in the status quo is insufficient, so people are essentially willing to take a risk with their life in migrant boats and things like that in order to try and escape from it. We're happy then to fund it more and all that sort of thing. Why is the principle justified? Because universal human rights exist. So we have the Universal Declaration of Human Rights, for example, which describes all human beings simply by virtue of being human are entitled to protection of their life and the protection of basic resources, for example, consistent with their needs as human beings. That's a very, very strong norm. And those kinds of rights are clearly not being protected under status quo, not being protected if a refugee or a candidate refugee stays in a conflict zone, not being protected by the UN system either, hence the consensus we're seeing. So it needs to change. And we're happy to make sure that the international aid budget of all states actually increases. We recognise that states like the United States of America, for example, spend about 0.3% of its GDP on international aid. The UK spends 0.7% and claims to be brilliant, but that's still nowhere near enough. When the US military budget is 4.6% of its GDP, we think there's definitely a counterbalance that can be achieved, especially when states recognise that refugees are no longer going to be solved by militarised solutions. And we think the collective action problem may exist. We think it's actually solvable at the point at which you create this as a new international obligation that binds all states, rather than simply saying, well, the US is going to pay for it on its own, right? All states are more likely to comply when they see all other states funding this as well, increasing their resources allocated to this. And that's really, really important. It's also a less fragmented system. It's now unified, so donors who want to send money to refugee causes are much better able to organise their efforts and force multiply them in terms of getting into one community where the infrastructure can be permanently built rather than these temporary camps that are in a constant state of collapse. That's a fairer system overall for the states who have to deal with refugees, rather than the burden of refugees who do initially impose significant cultural and economic costs on the host recipient states, like Turkey and Germany, for example, being disproportionately impacted by that. The burden falls on all states to fund this, and the state that hosts the territory gets a financial incentive to do that is sort of weighing up against the higher burden, which is not even that high because it's a depopulated area. Let's move on to benefits to refugees in a second. Let's hear from Yuki first.
People are willing to support refugees and care about refugees because that's also, like you say, a burden on their own nations. The moment you send them away and consolidate them into their own nation, why are people now also going to be willing to help them even
I think the refugees are already away. I think refugees are already out of sight, out of mind for most Western liberal citizens. The people of Japan, for example, don't meet many refugees, right? They're very wealthy, they live in very wealthy conditions. Maybe once every 4 or 5 weeks they'll see a 10-minute report on NHK about a refugee camp, and they'll think, oh, I'm so glad that's not me, right? That's pretty much all their engagement with these kinds of considerations. So this kind of representation, unifying into one bloc, people are more interested in what states have to say than individual refugees who have no way to organise. So it's much more likely their voice will be heard, represented politically, and so on. Benefits to refugees. Well, first off, protecting their rights. Less refugees are going to die under our model because we're funding better infrastructure, better rights being protected, all these things. Next, united voice, cohesive community is also quite likely to form. Israel is a fantastic precedent for this because it's a shared experience that unites that community. It's not ethnicity. Ethiopian Jews and German Jews can live together and constitute themselves newly as Israelis, and they feel part of that shared experience of community. And more important, and even than that, I think, this is a self-sustaining mechanism for dealing with refugees in the long term. Why? Well, look at Israel again. Israel still accepts anyone who has a claim to Jewish ethnicity as a new citizen because it has that common characteristic that unites them in a shared historical experience. In much the same way, this refugee state is going to feel a particular duty to take new refugees in, even if it becomes rich in the future. That's really important because it means this is going to be the place where they are most likely to understand those people's experiences, welcome and integrate them, and so on. And benefits to the West. One is really important. So refugees, often because they live in conditions of poverty and deprivation, they lose hope. They lose the ability to feel like they can ever have a good life. They become terrorists. That's kind of a bit Donald Trump. It's also quite true. Look at the Paris attacks, various attempted Muslim or Islamic terrorist attacks in Western Europe, for example. That kind of cause of terrorism lashing out against the international system that you perceive to have destroyed you and destroyed your claim to equal rights and equal personhood, that is not going to happen anymore when the international community is concretizing its contribution to your future by saying, no, we're actually going to fund and establish a community specifically for you, because you recognise that your problem is so critical and so important. So this is a radical initiative, but it's a massive problem. We're very happy to increase our funding, our resource commitment to solve something that is this important. We're very happy to propose.
Thank you, Max. Next, now we call upon Deputy Reader. Here.
Speaker. The problem of today's anti-government case is they overly generalize the interests of refugees by saying they have their ultimate goal or ultimate demands of refugees is to create the sovereign states of themselves. Mr. Speaker, look at the reality. There is not, because my parents have already told you there is a gravity of problem even among the refugees. If they have the different kind of individual needs based on their region, for example, based on their Boston or like their nation of origin or so forth. In this sense, we say just simply creating a nation of refugees is not at all a solution to the problem of refugees in the current paradigm. And this policy is particularly bad because they blanketly treat the refugees as if they are satisfied at the time when the state has created. So we say this kind of stance in itself is problematic, so we are very proud to oppose. So I have three arguments. Firstly, how the establishment of nation itself for refugees would make refugees to be unable to get out of the state of refugees in the first place. And secondly, in comparison, why public discourse regarding refugees would be more likely to be more tend to be more exclusive or anti-refugees within the Western nation. And secondly, lastly, about how a nation of refugees would look like in a realistic manner. So first about how the establishment of a nation itself would make refugees to be difficult to get out of this status of refugees. We think at the end of the day, this debate is about how in which paradigm refugees would be safe and how we can solve the problem of refugees. So we said the establishment of a nation, as I told you, maybe the refugees would be given the houses or minimum standard of living or rights to vote. But Mr. Speaker, that kind of benefit is just a short-term benefit at the end of the day. Why? Because in comparison of the status quo and their paradigm, we say in the current paradigm, the concept of refugees is very flat and flexible, right? Because they are moving and they are moving and they have the free movement, right? But compared to the status quo under their paradigm, because the state will be created, the concept of refugees will be concretized. Why this is so bad? Because like the international community or like the other kind of the nation that have the capacity to help the refugees can use the rhetoric by saying you have already a nation, you should not demand furthermore, right? Because we have paid, we have found a nation, and why? And in this sense, we say the refugees will be locked up under the nation that will be created under their paradigm. We say that is harmful in a two levels, because firstly, there are refugees who want to go, back to the original, the country of origin. For example, the Syrian refugees who have been oppressed, and they at the end of the day want to demand to go back to the original nation. That kind of things would be more difficult under the paradigm. And secondly, because the refugees who want to seek a better living would be no way for to seek a better life, because that many nations would use a rhetoric that we have found a lot of money and that cost is enough, right? So in this sense, we say the creation of nation itself would lock up the refugee upon a status of refugees forever. We say that is a problem of their cyber house. Yes.
Okay, we already allow independence when there's lots of conflict, such as how is in East Timor and lots of African nations, including North Sudan. How is it different from all those things?
Because the creation of their nation itself is too artificial, right? Because under their paradigm, under the name of a nation, but there are many kinds of refugees are going on. For example, civil refugees or environmental refugees of Rohingya who are oppressed by the Myanmar government. That kind of, we see the very kind of differences and diverse within the refugees. We say in this mechanism, at the end of the day, a nation of the refugees in itself would likely to fail. So, second, in a comparison regarding public discourse. So we say, yes, we concede. Our paradigm is not perfect, but compared to their paradigm, our paradigm is better to save and solve the problem of refugees. Why is that? Because the policy of the state is totally depends on the public discourse. Because at the end of the day, politicians have the incentive to hear the citizens' voices who are living in the nation. Right? So we have to compare how the citizens in general who are living in Canada or Germany or even Japan would feel about the refugee problem. So in our paradigm, at least from two analyses, citizens have the incentive to care about refugees. We see because they can internalize the problem of refugees. For example, many people are coming to when many refugees are coming to your house home, you have the incentive to care about their existence in itself. Secondly, because physically, when the Rohingya people are going to Bangladesh have a massive incentive to pressurize the Myanmar government to solve the problem of refugees in a ground. We say because the citizens on the ground can feel the problem of refugees is very close up to them in a current paradigm, that is good. But compared to the status quo, Mr. Speaker, we say they under the paradigm far like parties or exclusive would be likely to be empowered. Why is that? Because international community would legitimize the existence of nation of refugees. So that will be the scapegoat of the public discourse because they have a nation, and they cannot, the citizens in general cannot feel the problem of refugees as a cross problem, and they are likely to be ignorant to the problem of refugees under their paradigm. In this, Mr. Speaker, more and more refugees will be created, more and more refugees will be locked up to the status of refugees, so we will proudly oppose.
Thank you, Max. Next, now we go from the opposition with Here.
Mr. Speaker, this debate has become a bit messy, hasn't it? Let me try and clarify it and simplify it for you to make it as simple and as easy as it is to understand. Number one, both sides agree that the problem exists. Both sides agree on the gravity of the problem. Both sides agree that refugees and the status of refugees right now is hideous. We agree from our side that they have human rights. That's not something we're contending with. That's not even an issue in this debate. What we differ in this debate is regarding the solution. How do we go about tackling the problem of refugees? Their side, they're saying they're going to create a nation of refugees. And with government fiat, we're willing to give them as much money as they want, right? We're not saying they won't have the money. That's never was an issue from our side of the house. It was just a clarification that I asked, which they seem to want to talk about forever and ever. From our side of the house, what we're saying is, well, if you have that money, we're going to use that money in a different way. We're saying we're going to use that money to strengthen the current systems that exist, the camps that exist, the refugee camps that exist, and give money to nations that accept refugees right now, such as Canada, such as Germany, and we're going to help them in that way. Opposition fiat as well, they can't really say we won't give that money as well. It's reasonable to expect, to some extent, both sides will get what we want. The question is the outcome of those plans and solution, and what's really the best solution. Therefore, we're not contending from our side of the house that you won't even have a nation. That was never our case. What we're saying is you will get a nation, but it's unreasonable to expect that everyone will be happy within that nation, everyone will have the same opinions, and it will work completely well. That's what the debate is about. No, thank you. So the question is, what is the refugee problem itself? From inside government, we only hear one aspect, and that is the effects of the refugees. The refugees that have already become refugees, and that's all their policy tackles. They deal with refugees that have run away from the States, they deal with refugees that have managed to get away, and for those people, their plan might be good, because they now have a nation to go to. But is that really the only problem of refugees? That's something we questioned right from the very beginning, a nuance that was completely missed by their side of the house. Which shows that there's two aspects to refugees and the problem of refugees. It's not just the effects of refugees, it's also the cause of refugees itself. And the way you deal with the problem of refugees is by dealing not just with the effects of refugees, but also with the cause of the refugees as well. The moment you tackle those two, that's when you go about solving the problem and tackling this problem of refugees. In that way, they're very reactive to the problem. Their plan and policy only react to the effects of the refugee issue. We're being very proactive, and we're very willing to use the money that exists into other solutions to try and solve the problem itself. One of the examples that we gave was an option for military intervention, but we never said that was the only option. We're saying with more money, we have more options and more discourse to discuss about how best to go about solving the problems. They just tackle the example without really looking at the logic behind the example itself. That's not really a good review. So at the end, with all that said, and with all that clarified, right, let's look at a couple of things. Let's look at first Shingo's speech. And the reason he first gave for why we need to have a nation is this. He said there's a difference in attitude in accepting states towards refugees. And that was his first main problem that he had. That refugees are treated differently, that they're being discriminated against. And we agree with that to a certain extent, that they're being treated in a bad way, right? Discrimination does occur to a certain extent. But then, does this solution actually match the problem? Does it actually solve the problem itself? The only way you go about changing that attitude isn't by taking the people that they hate away from you and making them not think about the problem at all. It's by making that problem a part of something that you have to also discuss within their own country itself. What they do, and this is again something which is taught both by Sawa and Marina, is that you strengthen the rhetoric of the right wing that exists right now. The rhetoric of the right wing, people like Marine Le Pen in France, or in Netherlands, Donald Trump, and so on, is that they're all different people, that we only have to care about our own nation, our own people, and that's the rhetoric of the right wing right now. What they're doing is they're going to strengthen that rhetoric because their plan is, in essence, what that rhetoric is. They're taking away the people that are different from you, placing them in another category, locking them and consolidating them into a label called nation, and then saying they're happy because they're refugees. Refugees get their own state. They can be labeled as refugees. That's their problem now, not our problem. We don't think that really goes about solving the problem they tried to set out. They tried to solve in the first place, but moreover, it makes it far worse. Because we think, we also told you this, we think it's far better when people can internalize the problem as well. The moment you still have refugees in your own state, You are burdened to a certain extent because of these refugees. That makes you think about the problem, and that problem also becomes your problem, creating a political will to try and solve that problem in the first place. The moment you lose that burden that you feel as an individual within a society, you lose that political will to try and cater that problem as well, and that's something that also becomes problematic. Yes?
A rise of 1 million refugees in Germany has caused a spike in hate crime. Your policy involves infinitely expanding state capacity for certain recipient states. The problem with that is that far-right politicians in those states are empowered when they can point to 10 or 20 million refugees superficially failing to integrate and mobilise their voting bloc, say this is evidence of why we need to stop accepting refugees. Have a discrete system.
The reason why hate crimes are occurring is because, and the reason why that's even an issue right now, is because the refugees are treated badly in the moment they come in, and that's causing antagonism, that's causing the problem itself. We're dealing with that problem by creating a better environment for refugees, right? So what we also need to understand, and this is something that came out from Alex's speech, is that they said it's the same with Israel, because Jews, they have an identity. Question is, do refugees want to be known as refugees? Do they want to be labelled as refugees? We don't think so, and that's the comparison that you need to understand. Refugees are not necessarily actively chose to become refugees. That's not necessarily their identity, and we don't think that consolidating them and labelling them as a refugee and making that their identity is in any way beneficial for them. Moreover, we also need to understand a couple of things. They keep on talking about safety, 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 right? Well, on the both sides, we're probably going to get better safety mechanisms and better safety measures for refugees. Safety isn't really a contention in this debate. We're willing to accept the fact that they'll probably be safer in a nation rather than the status quo, but you also have to accept the fact that they'll probably be safer in a much better environment on the our side as well compared to the status quo, right? That's not really a point in this debate. What you need to understand is this. What is the reason for having a nation? Is that really going to create a beneficial state for the refugees? And is that also going to be dealing with the actual problem at hand? We don't think so.
Thank you, Max. Next, now we go from the opposition report. Take care.
Safety of the current refugees became not mutually exclusive in today's round, because simply the reason only today's government bench want to create the nation is for safety, right? And the safety created by the government bench is throughout the massive amount of funding. We totally conceded from the very first speech of mine that monetary capacity is existing in both paradigms. We acknowledge that fiat coming from the government side. So we just told you that we use the money for our way of the protection, and that was consistently told from the three speakers from the opposition side. Therefore, the temporary or the urgent rescue to those current refugees who unfortunately already became refugees is not a mutually exclusive benefit, right? The problem of the status quo, but then they told us that the problem of the status quo is that the refugee crisis is clouded out. Other important problems are being the top priority and they are neglected, right? But we believe those kind of hierarchy of the problem is ultimately going to happen even on their side of the house, right? Because as we told you, there are going to be many kinds of the refugees in their one nation, which means that there are going to be the hierarchy between the vulnerability, Mr. Speaker. For example, there are refugees from the conflict zones, or there are refugees from those kind of environmental refugees, right? We believe in that kind of occasion, those food lost families are seen as most vulnerable actors, or those kind of things, right? We believe those kind of problem of the hierarchy is not the mutually exclusive harm that only stands in our paradigm. So moving on to the outcomes, right? We told you our stance is to be proactive. We're not we told you that instant rescue of the current refugees are already done in both paradigms. So what we have to focus upon is that how those kind of nation, creation of the refugee nation is going to bring what kind of the outcome that they are going to bring, right? So the Assad government told us firstly about the identity of the refugees. As we already pointed out from our side of the house, that we told you that there are like diverse kinds of the refugees, and if they say that the logic of the identity crisis is that like coercively integrating Canadian citizens and the refugees is the logic of the identity crisis, their like side of the house still has the identity crisis, Mr. Speaker, because there are going to be many refugees from many countries speaking many foreign languages in their one nation. We don't think they are going to create like a good like identity as a refugee, right? The second of all, they told us about the sustainability. But at this point, like crucially stand on the premise that refugee nation can be independent and solely like exercise their sovereignty, that they can create their own like trading policies, or they can create their own like preferable like economy, right? Market. We believe, like as we told you, that the identity of the refugees are so diverse, that the demand of the refugees are so diverse, which they have neglected in today's round. We believe in that kind of occasion, like because there are going to be many diverse kind of the demands inside of one nation, we believe this is very difficult to like make it as a one like big like aim as one nation, right? We believe in that kind of occasion, if they don't like attack this point, this sustainability is very, very weak point to begin with. But furthermore, like what we told you from the side opposition is that the outcome is going to be much worse than the status quo. Because what we told you from the side opposition is that this motion is going to create the rhetorical power to the far right wing parties. Because those kind of far right wing parties is going to utilize this kind of motion by saying that because there is a universal consent, like that how to tackle this kind of refugee crisis. We're not just doing something extreme, like we're not like kicking out the refugees, but we're like creating one nation. That is going to be less internalizing the problem inside the domestic domestic sphere, and we believe that is not going to tackle the real root cause of the creation of the refugees in the first place. That means that on their side of the house, as an outcome, there are going to be more refugees since the root cause is not solved on their paradigm. So ultimately, they're doing the like problem-solution mismatch. We believe we have to win this debate.
Thank you, Max. Next one is from Ghana paper. Here.
Liberia is a nation for a black population who were enslaved for centuries and generations. Israel is a nation for a Jewish population who experienced persecution. Even if black, Jewish, is disenfranchised and discriminated right now and not solved right now, but why do you negate the right to statehood as a protection as a universal human right? That was the question we have asked, not responded by that side of their bench. Clarification and 3 questions. So clarification first. They claim, ridiculously I should say, they should not be and do not want to be seen as a refugee. We treat and identify as citizens on our side of the house because people are going to be having a nation independent for refugee. The comparative is this. Rather, opposition have to face a scenario where people is going to be seen as refugees in status quo when people go to camps as an alternative, or refugees go to Germany as a status of refugees. People are not really identified as citizens on that side of the house. Rather, people are identified as citizens on our side of the house. I don't see how, therefore, that side of claim stands in today's debate. But second, we told you how, and do not represent us. Safety is not an only achievement, which is achieved on our, only achieved on our side of the house. We are more nuanced. Safety and improvement quality of life for those people who are so far more disenfranchised on the status quo. So mutual exclusivity is not a good metric to adjudicate this debate, because the kind of alternative policy makes the situation far worse in the quality of life, for example, on the status quo. So let's look at 3 questions. 1, root cause being attacked versus compensation. Next, does this system benefit refugees? Is this policy feasible? So, root cause being tackled versus compensation. The first claim and challenge from opposition was this: we want to solve and deal with the root cause. Sure, that was beautiful indeed. Let me point out their suggestion is damaging in the following manner. 4 things. 1, it is speculative at best. Single example of Myanmar doesn't justify the opposition bench, because we have told you how, in many circumstances, to tackling the root cause problem, in and of itself is an immensely difficult project such as Syria, and let's recognize all the civil war in Sudan. And don't be comparative to the benefit which is guaranteed on our side of the house and speculative and possibility merely on that side of the house. But thirdly, in vast majority of cases, once again, tackling down is different. But fourthly, critically, Even if we can solve the discrimination completely from the root cause, it does not necessarily sufficiently justify the opposition bench, because even if discrimination exists, we offer a safety for Jewish, black people as a statehood. Let's talk about the principal backbone for this reason. Compensatory policy for affirmative bench is justified from the perspective of universal human rights to be protected by nation state. Even if they have an alternative, the logic is flawed. Internalization, not going to work, correctly identified or here not responded to. Meaning of solution which opposition wants to impose to us is illegitimate. We don't see how only a form of solution is a root cause solution. We think people who need right now is the best solution for affirmative bench offers the best solution for people who need right now. But furthermore, Alice is critically nuanced in POI. In what way, farm right argument is dead on that side of their bench. That is the benefit of refugee. The challenge from the yellow was this, division of interest. Of course it may be different. That's why we gave a voting right, the right to govern themselves and create a politics for their sake. Right? We grant a statehood and sovereignty for security. When UN misrepresent and misallocate the resource, we are able to correct that misallocation. And furthermore, they have talked about lock up into state. Allows refugees to lock up and die at a camp. No sustainable protection is guaranteed.
Yeah.
I don't see the value. Locking up into safe home is a harm contrast to side opposition. Okay, let's be very generous to them. Division of interest. What's the harm? I've already dealt in two ways of how to confront the scenario if refugee in Germany is not fully happy inside Germany that the UK was conceding to that problem. But lastly, in terms of policy efficiency, never dealt by that side of the house, which implies also the legitimization of our movement as well. From these comprehensive reasons, we are the ones who are guaranteeing the safeness for people who are most vulnerable and needed the most. We're very proud of those.